Hey, Southern Nevada, let's talk about your tap water. Despite its hard, mineral-rich taste, your water surpasses drinking standards, so don't confuse hard water with its quality. Sourced from the Rocky Mountains, your water is analyzed more than 328,000 times a year and treated and monitored 24/7 by a team of technical experts. Learn more about the testing of your water at snwa.com. SNWA is a not-for-profit water agency. Hey y'all, executive producer Layla Mohammed here. Vegas residents know hard work, but you don't have to do it all yourself. Taskrabbit has been helping locals in the Neon City for over a decade with everything from furniture assembly to minor home repairs. Don't let that to-do list run your weekend. Use the Taskrabbit app to describe what you need and find a skilled tasker in your neighborhood who can take it off your plate. You'll see the hourly rate up front, so there's no surprises at checkout. Download the TaskRabbit app or visit taskrabbit.com today to get those home to-dos crossed off.
Last week, the Review Journal and the Las Vegas Sun published competing op-eds on the same topic. The Review Journal, which has been printing and including the Sun, ostensibly its competitor, in its pages, wants to stop. But why was it printing the Sun in the first place? And should it continue? Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we talk with UNLV history professor Michael Green and longtime media observer and lawyer David Figler about the newspaper wars of Las Vegas, both past and present. It's Thursday, April 9th. I'm Sonia Cho Swanson, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Mike, David, it's so great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Me too.
Well, we're getting into some really fascinating stuff here because this apparently goes back much further than I ever knew. Let's start with some context. So why was the RJ even printing the Sun in the first place? I mean, aren't they competitors?
Well, in 1989, they signed what is called a joint operating agreement, which was based on a 1970 law signed by, of all people, Richard Nixon.
No way. Huh.
And it would allow a failing newspaper, which the Sun was considered to be, to keep publishing with the help of the successful paper, in this case, the RJ. So according to the agreement they made at the time, the Sun, which had had the more lucrative morning market, started coming out in the afternoon. So yes, only in Las Vegas did the Sun come out in the afternoon. We really are a 24-hour town.
Uh-huh.
And the Review Journal had the morning market to itself. Also, the Sun was not responsible for advertising or circulation. That was the Review Journal's business. And the Sun's staff would be a percentage or proportion of the Review Journal's, meaning if the RJ had a certain number of reporters, the Sun was to have a certain number, and then it was up to the Sun to spend the money if they wanted more.
So did this come about because the Sun essentially said, hey, we're struggling, we can't really keep our coffers full, so they turned to the Review Journal and said, can you help us out?
Ostensibly. I mean, 1989 was an interesting year because it was the year that the founder of the Las Vegas Sun died, Hank Greenspan. But once, Papa Greenspan was gone, the newspaper had to admit that despite the fact that they had an amazing journalism staff there and were putting out great content, they just weren't making money. So they decided to enter into this. Basically, it was to make sure that there was no monopoly of news in a community. And so they had to kind of suck it up and admit that they were a failing paper, at least economically, though I don't know that it was ever a profitable enterprise. But it was really more of a civic service, at least in the eyes of the patriarch Hank Greenspan. And I know that his last wishes were for his children to carry on the legacy of this very important civic project, the Las Vegas Sun.
And it really was not a cash cow. There were times it made a profit. But to go back into the history, the Sun first started publishing in 1950 as a response, if you will, to the Review Journal put out by the International Typographical Union. The typesetters here had been locked out at the RJ by the new main owner, Don Reynolds. So they start their own paper, and they're looking for a buyer, and Greenspan bought the paper and goes toe-to-toe with the Review Journal. By the early 60s, the Sun was, I would say, catching up. It was in a pretty close battle. And then in 1963, a fire destroyed the Sun's building.
Oh.
And they never quite recovered from that. But at the same time, Greenspun himself tended to look to other avenues for money making. As David said, it was more of a civic matter than the Sun being a cash cow. And so he had invested in land. He had helped start Channel 8. Later, he gets the cable company or the cable deal.
And that's Cox Cable, which you wound up selling for $1 billion, or the family sold for $1 billion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pretty funny.
Yeah, some pocket change.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they dropped a coin or two.
But they were always, Michael, and I think you'd agree with me, sort of the keeping everyone accountable, at least who they didn't like in the community. And that was kind of Hank Greenspun's thing. He'd go toe-to-toe with Joseph McCarthy. But there was some really outstanding reporting both before and after he died. And the Sun undoubtedly, and I could say this unequivocally, has been, and to a degree continues to be, though not as much, a very important part of Las Vegas, and its growth and its growing uppedness. Yeah.
So the newspaper wars, this tension between the RJ and the Sun isn't new. It stretches way back. And I know, Mike, that you've done research on the, quote, newspaper wars of the 1950s. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, the Review-Journal was run for Don Reynolds by a co-owner, Al Kalin, who had first come here in the 1920s. And his brother John was the top editor. And Greenspun started his column Where I Stand, which Brian Greenspun still writes. And he started it because Al Kalin's column was called From Where I Sit. And it turns out that he wrote From Where I Stand, and they dropped the from going to the composing room. So it became Where I Stand. And he realized that he wasn't going to get anywhere doing the same thing that his competitor did, and he wasn't inclined to. The Review-Journal in those days was nominally Democratic, but very conservative. They were Pat McCarran's house organ, for lack of a better term, and Greenspun was all too happy to attack McCarran, whom he considered correctly an anti-Semite and a political machine operator.
One of the reasons why our airport has been renamed, in fact.
Indeed. And at one point, someone from McCarran's office made a phone call, and almost every casino in Las Vegas canceled its advertising in the Sun within like a 30-minute period.
Oh, what year was this?
This was in 1952. And McCarran was one of the most powerful members of the U.S. Senate, and certainly the most powerful politician in Nevada. And so Greenspun had a great time attacking McCarran and attacking the Review-Journal for being allied with McCarran. McCarthy, Al Kalin's editorials and columns were saying, yeah, he's right about communism, etc. And Greenspun's point was, I'm anti-communist, but McCarthy's going about it the wrong way. And there's a great night where McCarthy speaks out here. This is in October of 1952. McCarthy's campaigning for the Republican Party. And he attacks Greenspun by name and calls him an admitted ex-communist. And Greenspun, who could be incredibly funny while also being correct, said he probably meant ex-convict. Because Greenspun had in fact pled guilty to violating the Neutrality Act for running guns to Israel. It's incredible.
Wild West of newspapers. My goodness.
He eventually dies. And so the family is left holding this newspaper that has this contentious history and trying to figure out how to move forward. And so they become the afternoon paper and the RJ becomes the morning paper. And they are constantly throughout this historical period fighting each other with editorials. That is not an exception, the one that you cited for this latest kerfuff, but something goes all the way back.
Occasionally, I would do a piece saying of Sherm Frederick, who was the RJ publisher, and Brian Greenspun, who succeeded his father and then his mother. You guys are amateurs compared with the old days. You're attacking each other. You should have been around back then.
The Las Vegas Academy of the Arts, or LVA, is a 12-time Grammy Award-winning high school, the most of any high school in the nation. And the LVA Music Conservatory faculty are performing in a special fundraising concert on Monday, April 20th at 6 p.m. in the Loudon Theater. Mark your calendars. The goal is to raise $50,000 for a 9-foot Steinway Model D concert grand piano. Their existing concert piano is beyond repair, and this opportunity is due to a partnership with Southern Nevada Music. There are multiple ways to support. You can attend the concert, you can donate, there's even a silent auction, and you don't have to actually go to the concert to donate or participate in the silent auction. There's some very cool things you can bid on, including a live vocal caroling event. You can get the mariachi band to come perform for you, get a jazz song dedication. What a great gift. And my personal favorite, you could actually, on stage, guest conduct one of their orchestra performances. So visit www.lasvegasacademy.net to purchase tickets, donate, access the silent auction, and support LVA students. Every ticket, donation, and bid brings us one step closer to giving these talented students the instruments they deserve. You know, I always found it funny because I remember getting the RJ in high school and you'd open it up and there'd be like another newspaper inside. It was like, you know, bonus paper, but also why? And I guess my question, to understand the origin and really wrap up this piece of the conversation is the rationale behind putting the Sun in the RJ was because of a mandate from Nixon. Is this sort of an anti-monopoly mandate? Is that kind of the reason behind it?
No, I think it was out of necessity, and the parties they've never really set well with this operating agreement that was sanctioned by the government and by the statute, right? You know, John Ralston, our friend of the podcast, has pontificated that it was kind of in the RJ's best interest because they didn't want to see a bigger newspaper move into the community and be real competition. So that, you know...
So keep the Sun just alive just enough
to
be...
They actually... they were thriving as a venue for reporting in our community. I mean, and we're going to talk probably in a second about, you know, to the culmination when they won the only Pulitzer Prize that any Nevada newspaper has ever gotten back in 2009.
You know what? Let's get into it, actually, because I do want to help our listeners understand. I mean, even if you maybe weren't alive during that era, if you're a younger listener, but how would you contextualize how important both the RJ and the Sun were in the heyday of Vegas newspapers?
Bear in mind that when I was a kid, 3 main TV stations affiliated with networks, plus The Independent, plus PBS. And you did not have the internet. You did not have all of these other venues to get information. So you got your paper, Sun in the morning, the RJ in the afternoon, and they did a morning edition of it. And that's where you found out what was happening. Not only did you find out what was happening some of the time, you found out their versions of what was happening. And there were times the RJ and Sun would cover the same thing, and you'd sit there and look at it and say, I wonder just where the truth lies. And the answer was sort of in the middle. If it was something that was of great interest to the ownership.
And I think we've alluded to this, but in general, the Sun tended to give maybe a slightly more progressive viewpoint or take on the reporting, and the RJ gave a more conservative take on things.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and I think that especially coalesced in the post-1989 era. So you have 1989 when they get into this joint operating newspaper agreement with the RJ. That goes as 2 separate papers that are delivered to your house at different times of the day. It was a disaster for the Sun because their readership just even further plummeted. Nobody really wants an afternoon newspaper. Mornings are kind of your newspaper time. And so in 2005, because of all the different things that really weren't working out in that agreement, the parties went together and filed what they thought was a valid amended operating agreement that created the insert. Basically, that at least those 6 pages or however many pages would be inside the RJ every day. And so they ceased publication. That saved a lot of money for the RJ. They didn't have to print 2 separate newspapers with 2 separate distributions. But then we get to 2009, and you've got the golden age of the Sun anew, behind the very strong reporting of then, young reporter, only 2 years out of J school, Ali Berzon. She does this great investigative report about how there's all these deaths and OSHA violations and things like that at this construction site that is now the home of the Aria and Vidara and all those.
City Center.
Yeah, city center. And it made this huge, it changed the way OSHA does stuff. But after they won the Pulitzer, Brian Greenspun, who is now the head of The Sun, he had received all the accolades of being, a Pulitzer Prize winner for public service, like one of the big Pulitzer Awards. And then later that same year, he fired half the staff of the Las Vegas Sun. And it was a very, very bloody day. And then between 2009...
This is like right in the wake of the Pulitzer?
Yeah, same year, same calendar year.
Wow.
And he said, this is a financial and economic reality. By the time you get to 2011, most of the staff is already gone. All the really great writers had left for either fellowships or gone over to the RJ or had just gone to ProPublica or any other, Politico. They were getting snatched up left and right. I mean, Allie Berzon didn't last the year. She got snatched up by the Wall Street Journal. And has had a storied journalism career since then. But between 2011 and 2013, the Greenspun family fortune took a weird turn. Brian Greenspun had invested a sizable amount of money in other legacy media, the Chicago Tribune and the Los Angeles Times in particular. That almost instantly lost him hundreds of millions of dollars. So they were hurting there as well. And then there was turmoil within the family because there was allegations that the other siblings, the three siblings, had made a secret backdoor deal with the RJ to stop publishing The Sun. And I believe that was around 2013, Michael. You could probably take it from there.
It was somewhere in there. And it was horrible to watch. This family that had been very united in a lot of ways. And to this day, there are these divisions within the Greenspun family.
Michael, you note that 2013 was around at this time when there were these divisions, breakdowns happening in the Greenspun family. 2015 saw the Adelson family acquire the Review Journal. How did that impact the relationship between the RJ and the Sun?
It was interesting because in certain ways it didn't have that big an effect because many of the same people were still at the RJ. Glenn Cook, who is the top editor there, has been with the RJ for many years. And it seemed to me that the Adelsons coming into this from outside journalism.
Famously a casino magnate.
Yeah. The Adelsons had far less interest in sustaining the Las Vegas Sun or continuing to publish it, and eventually took the steps that led to the decision that has ended the appearance of the Sun within the RJ, at least for now.
Yeah, and to be clear, the Sun is alive online. You can still go check out the Sun's articles on the website.
And they still have staff, but their lawyers are saying in open court in federal proceedings, this will be the death knell to our already skeletal crew of employees and journalists at our paper.
Question. Here's my question about that, because first of all, does anyone actually read print anymore? Because I understood it. Well, I mean, I certainly will occasionally read a print paper, but I thought that most of the readership was moving online. So why does that seem like such a strong argument for them? And also, do either the RJ's or the Sun's arguments even hold water legally?
Well, that's to be seen because there is an evidentiary hearing in front of the federal judge, and she is going to hold a full-on evidentiary hearing to basically suss out these arguments on both sides as to whether this was a technicality and failing to, get the proper signage on the 2005 amendment, where they were supposed to, by that statute that, happened under the Nixon administration, get a sign off from whoever the attorney general of the country is. And it's undisputed that for whatever reason, when the RJ and the Sun amended amended the agreement, that they did not get that sign off. And that has turned out by the Ninth Circuit, the Supreme Court rejecting it, the whole thing. That is the problem, that without that signature, it was a void contract. And therefore, all the injunctions forcing the RJ to print the Sun are now done. And the judge said, no, I'm going to keep it in place. And then the Ninth Circuit, which are basically her bosses, said, you're not following our order. And then she dissolved it. And that's why the Sun, for the first time in whatever it is, 70-something years, did not appear in print.
Wow. It's almost like a marriage getting annulled. Like, you actually weren't ever really married.
Yeah, you were never really married, and all your babies are illegitimate. Sorry.
Oh, my goodness. The blow.
And the RJ, very persuasively is arguing that the Sun has not sustained its relevance or being a challenge to the RJ as the only other source in a long time. And I would say, fundamentally, press in a community, especially an independent press, especially different voices, is vital for democracy to thrive. I mean, let's not forget either that when Adelson took over the paper, it was a secret from even their own staff. And there was a lot of, there were a lot of Nevada Press Awards that were handed out to the staff of the Review Journal since fired for uncovering who their new owner really was. And let's not also forget that the RJ at the time in 2016 was the only major newspaper in the country that endorsed one Donald J. Trump for president.
Under the ownership of one Mr. Adelson.
One GOP mega donor. Yes.
Right. What I guess I'm wondering is, what does it mean for the Las Vegas news environment if the sun starts setting with this court decision?
It's a loss. And it's a loss because it's the loss of a voice. Now, is that voice as loud or as important as it used to be? Most definitely not. Not only because the sun has shrunk, but because there are other places like this podcast right here, where you get news and analysis. So the days when newspapers were the source, and it was print newspapers that were the source, are behind us. And one of the comments that I have encountered in hearing discussion of this whole fight is that if the RJ does not have to print the Sun daily, the RJ may decide not to print the RJ daily. Their circulation is hurting in terms of home delivery. And there are a lot of newspapers around the country that have cut way back, if not entirely eliminated, print versions. You can get them online. Now, the Sun presumably could still be online, charging for access, just as so many sites do.
And they have. I mean, they have a notorious paywall.
There's a paywall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they might be able to make it and they might not. But it's terrible to lose a voice, but it's less terrible than it used to be because of the prevalence of other voices.
I will say that, as great as journalists throughout Las Vegas history, both at the RJ and the Sun have been, the era of 2009, before the massive layoff, the lead up, the turn of the century to 2009, you need to have an investment in your journalists to be able to let them do the work that they need to do. And the Sun just stopped doing that. First with that giant layoff in 2009, and then in 2011, and in subsequent years. And so that's why, when the greatest tragedy to ever hit Las Vegas, which was 1 October, occurred, the largest mass shooting in United States history, reporting on that garnered accolades by the Pulitzer Prize Committee for, as a finalist to the New York Times. And that's the thing, is that the New York Times is a fully funded and operational newsroom. I don't think that the Sun, despite there being very talented people there still to this day, has that same level of resource to be able to, compete in the world or actually present as much as I think even they would like to do. And so I don't know where this argument's going to fall out or how it's going to really impact the community, other than it just being sad. And then you get guys like me and Michael being very nostalgic of all the people we knew who used to be these great reporters who left our community because it just wasn't a vibrant place for journalists to be forever. You know? And
so is your prediction that we're going to see the Sun basically end with a whimper, not a bang? It's not going to come back in any form?
I fear that's the case. I wish it wasn't. But it also depends on how much money there is to spend, the will to do it, and the will involves the innovations you have to make or the changes you have to make to pull that off. And there is still good reporting in there.
Agreed.
They still do some fine work. And they, frankly, appearing in the RJ were an interesting counterbalance. You could see the RJ get more right-wing having the Sun in its pages.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it'll be interesting to see, presuming the Sun doesn't come back into the RJ, whether that has any effect on what they do editorially. Probably
You know,
not.
that's interesting, too. Another point about actually having the print editions is you can actually look at them side by side. Whereas how many people on a website will actually do that? You know, have the Sun tab and the RJ tab open side by side. Besides you, Figler, I know.
I know, we're geeks, but
Yes.
I wonder what that stat is. How many people make it through to the Sun even?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it remains to be seen. My prediction is that the Sun will pivot to become a YouTube influencer, mukbang, ramen eating, profit-driven machine. I think that's how they rise from the ashes and make their money once again.
Fingers crossed.
I just hope it brings the family all back together and they do something fun and innovative with their dough.
Oh, that'd be nice. Family Feud.
Yes.
Over.
Who knows? Game show. Yeah, over. Yeah. There we go. All right. Well, Mike, David, thank you both so much for being here on CityCast Las Vegas.
Thank you.
Go journalism.
Go journalism.
Hear, hear.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, go tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. Don't forget you can support this show and get some great perks by becoming a CityCast Las Vegas neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Take care.